Welcome back. You're watching Business Week on Arise News. News was out this week that one of Africa's biggest fintech companies, Flutterwave, almost suffered a security breach in April, around a month after a court order was secured to recover $24 million lost due to unauthorized transactions on its platform. Cybersecurity is one of the biggest modern-day threats facing the world. To secure a sustained commitment to cybersecurity and address investment gaps, African countries need to collectively spend around $22 billion up to 2026. That's the equivalent of about 0.25% of total regional annual GDP. Approximately 90% of African businesses are operating without cybersecurity protocols in place, making them vulnerable to cyber threats such as hacking, phishing, and malware attacks. The economic consequences of digital insecurity are already substantial. It is estimated that it costs South Africa $570 million a year, Nigeria $500 million a year, and Kenya $36 million. In addition, research has shown that businesses are more reluctant than individuals to adopt and use the internet for e-commerce as a result of fear of insufficient data security, a sector which is projected to reach $180 billion a year by 2025. Here today, I have two experts to help us dissect the future of payment security. First is Nkebet Mesele, Senior Director, Solutions Management at Visa Sub-Saharan Africa. And also joining me is Dooshima Dapo-Oyewole, 2023 ITU Policy and Diplomacy Cyber Track Fellow. Thanks for joining the show, ladies. Great to have you on.
Thank you, Rolaka. Good morning. Nice to be here.
Thank you. My first question is going to go to Dooshima. And Dooshima, I want to ask you if there's a way to quantify lost economic value in Nigeria and Africa as a result of cyber fraud and risks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rolake. So yes, there is a way to calculate the lost economic value. However, it is quite challenging for organizations due to several factors. So first and foremost, you have to consider the complexity and scope of cyber incidents. Each type of incident has a different implication for an organization. So whether it's a ransomware attack, a phishing attack, a data breach, it has, a different cost to an organization. Then you also have to consider your intangible costs, things like the loss of trust with your customers, the impact on brand value and reputational damage. And then finally, there are also hidden and delayed costs when it comes to cyber incidents, which are not always apparent immediately and can emerge over time. So we're looking at things like legal liabilities, regulatory fines, and your long-term operational disruptions that can manifest several months or years after an incident. That being said, despite the challenges, there are several cyber risk quantification methodologies that an organization can leverage to estimate the economic cost. And you'd be looking at tools and frameworks like the FAIR Institute's factor analysis for information risk, your ISSA's COVID design and implementer guide or risk IT framework. So there are tools that you can deploy, but it's not always going to be an exact science, and it differs for each organization.
Yes, indeed. And thank you very much for highlighting the intangible costs as well, because these costs are not always financial, and reputation and trust are big currencies in today's business world. So I'll come to you, Nkebet. Looking at the work that Visa does in the payment space, you're a provider to so many other types of fintech companies. What are some of the current dynamics of the payment industry that are shaping the emergence of cybersecurity risks?
Thanks, Rolaka. So what we've seen recently is, and this started a lot after COVID, more and more payments moved to mobile. There was now a lot of Internet of Things. You could make payments anywhere. Payments became ubiquitous. And with payments and digital transformation also comes cybersecurity, because you now have data in different places. And so there's now a risk of data breaches, where digital now becomes an everyday life. People are sharing information online, sharing financial information online. And so we've seen that threat coming in month on month, year on year since 2019, and the advent of remote work, remote payments. And also what we are doing as Visa is we just recently concluded a workshop this week where we brought in all the industry players in cybersecurity, in risk and compliance to sort of educate them on this trend. So it's been a lot lately. It's been, people are now using mobile more than they used to use it before. People are using mobile for their transactions. People are using mobile, putting their card details, putting their information in different places on the web. And this is now leading to more risk and more data breaches. That's what we see.
And it's very interesting because if I look over the last years, I think once a year for the past 3 years, I've got a notification saying that there's been a data breach that may be related to 1 or 2 passwords you use on several sites. And I'm sure some of us here have also got those types of messages from the likes of Google. But Dooshima, when such incidences do happen, what should companies do with regards to crisis communication following these sorts of incidents? Because we hear sometimes that companies don't want to alert the public, perhaps if it's been a small breach, and they felt keeping quiet is better than saying something, which may be then blown out of proportion. But what is crisis communication like in these sorts of circumstances?
So, I will admit, companies do shy away, especially in our parts of the world, from the ideal way to respond during a crisis. We shy away from open communication because it's at variance, right, with our cultural practices. And that open communication really is a critical pillar of your crisis communication. If you are going to establish and maintain digital trust with your audience and your customers. So what's the ideal way to respond during a crisis? Well, this is first of all working on the assumption that prior to an incident, an organization has understood the life cycle of a crisis, and they have mapped out their key stakeholders and their required needs. So in this scenario, that would include your regulators, your customers, staff, internal key stakeholders, and the press, people like you as well. So the anatomy of an ideal response for me, it's factual, it's emotional, it's prompt. You establish the facts quickly so that confidence can be maintained in the integrity of your systems. So in the Flutterwave example this week, one of the things that I've noticed is there various versions of the story, various amounts being, touted as, the cost of the attack. One platform is saying 11 billion, another is saying 20 billion, and, their statement is saying no funds at all were lost. So they really need to stick to the ABCs. They've got to acknowledge, you've got to be transparent, and then you've got to communicate, control, and correct. Another thing I noticed in the stories going around this week in the statement from Flutterwave was a little sentence at the end, which was telling consumers that, they needed to ensure that they're taking necessary precautions. And, I don't know about you, but during a crisis, that's not really the ideal time to try and teach an audience, a new concept that can be interpreted as sort of pushing blame to customers. And honestly, it's sort of a lost opportunity because that message is something that you want your users on your platform to hear and comprehend. So I think they can do much better with encouraging users to learn about cybersecurity risk, improving digital literacy, and just being a bit more transparent and open with their communication during a crisis such as this.
Sense of open communication and transparency, such as the Flutterwave example. The company did actually come out to say no money was lost. So I think that's an important clarification that always needs to be made. Nkebet, at Visa, what are your economists projecting as the future of payments and commerce, in terms of cybersecurity innovations? Because even those challenges around security online actually then provide new product opportunities. So what do you see on the horizon for risk as a service, perhaps?
Yes. So at Visa, while we know that commerce is changing, in fact, it's changing so tremendously that everyone is actually trying to keep up, right? And with that comes the risk of vulnerability. So what Visa is doing is we have a lot of security measures we're putting into creating products now using machine learning, using AI, using risk-based authentication. So, i.e., so for instance, if you're doing a payment online and the hacker knows that, oh, your bank could ask for OTP. So they have your phone, they hack your phone. What we are moving into is more risk-based authentication where instead of an OTP, relying just on an OTP as a two-factor authentication, we're doing risk-based authentications where we say, is it the same phone? Is it the same amount? Has this customer paid on this same site before? Is it the same IP address, for instance? And so we use different measures to make those decisions. And that is what we see payment is going to look like from a risk and cybersecurity standpoint, where it's not just going to be things that can be taken like your OTP, like your token. It's going to be more based on machine learning, behavioral type authentications. And risk as a service, allow me add compliance as a service there, because we are now going to see more companies outsource their risk and compliance to thought leaders, to experts who would help them do this. Because when you look at the business of a fintech or a bank, they sell products, they're more based on growth. And so as they grow, they realize the vulnerabilities that can lie if they do not have top-notch infrastructure. And so we see risk as a service becoming a big thing, compliance as a service becoming a big thing, and companies that can position themselves for this phase, it would really do a great deal for them. But as Visa, all our products are now being built with risk-based authentication, more behavioral learnings, and AI collaborations.
Yes, indeed, Nkebet. It almost seems as if you need more cybersecurity incidents to happen for you to then refine your risk management approach using case studies. But I wanted to ask you a follow-up question around the adoption of payment platforms. Do you think, or do you see in the data available to you, that consumers are not adopting certain types of technology or products that you have primarily because of the fear of cyber insecurity or fraud, or because of other reasons? I don't know if there's any kind of data that would tell us why consumers may not be adopting certain types of payment products.
Yes, that's an interesting question, because it's something we were just talking about this week as related to contactless payments. So you would find out that in other countries, contactless payment is the norm. You know, you go, you tap your card, you go away. And now it's moved beyond just tapping your card. Your phone has now become a payment device where you tap your phone using your digital credentials and you make payments. But we see a lack of trust here in Africa and a lot of developing countries, where people feel, I had my card, I put in my PIN, I was still defrauded. Now I'm just going to tap it, and it's going to, and what happens when I just have to tap it? I'm giving myself up to that risk. And so what needs to happen is a lot of education. Digital literacy needs to be a big thing. We are doing a lot, working with the banks, working the committee of e-banking industry heads. The data shows that as more people are digitally literate, they have the propensity to move faster in the digital revolution. Because think about it, it starts with trust. When people trusted that they could put their information on social media became mainstream. Now, how do we build in that trust into financial transaction? Because people are happy to put their pictures, but they are more skeptical when their money is involved. So creating that trust through education, through awareness, through letting people know that with the adequate protection on their side, they can use these payment methods. So that is the primary and focus that should be given as relates to this as we start this digital movement.
Yes, indeed. We've heard a lot about trust, and I know, Dooshima, there's the digital trust principles for boards, which I know you're quite passionate about and you have an understanding of. So let's take it to the corporate level. How can company boards and leaders in organizations provide stronger oversight in this area? Because for those companies whose revenue models are built around digital payments, financial infrastructure, fintech, you know, your inability to control the digital space is essentially an existential issue. So what can the boards do in terms of governance and oversight of the digital space?
Absolutely, Rolake. So just as Nkebet said, digital trust is the natural progression of the digital transformation journey as more and more interactions continue to happen online. How can boards provide more leadership, stronger oversight in this area? Definitely by leaning into guidance from industry bodies like ISACA. So earlier this year, ISACA released what's called a digital trust ecosystem framework, which suggests 5 principles that boards and governing bodies can adopt in support of digital trust. And the principles cover 2 areas: what a board should be doing, what they should expect from their management towards accelerating digital trust. And they touch on things such as systems thinking, risk governance and management, awareness, and also using appropriate frameworks. An enterprise can definitely improve its relationship with customers, enhance its reputation, and increase brand loyalty, definitely by adopting digital trust principles.
Yeah, and when we talk about regulation, people sometimes talk about whether regulation is a hindrance or an enabler. So Dooshima, still a follow-up question for you is, how can regulation around this be an enabler? Because we see regulators, especially big banks, the central banks around the world, clamping down on some of these newer type fintechs out there because of the fear and concern around digital insecurity. So how should regulation achieve the right balance to enable and help businesses grow?
So I think for that, it will require a mindset shift on both sides, from the regulators and from companies and fintechs as well. Risk and compliance, they're enablers that support sustainable growth. So your GRC initiatives, they enhance operational efficiency, they help you build trust. I think where the challenge and the resistance come is people see them as hindrances instead of enablers to help them achieve their strategic objectives.
You mentioned 2 acronyms earlier, ISACA and GRC. Can you just tell us what they stand for the benefit of our audience?
Oh, absolutely. So GRC, that's just, short form for your governance, risk, and compliance. And ISACA, that's it's a professional association. That's the Information Systems Audit and Control Association. So it's a body that supports professionals in cybersecurity around IT governance.
All right, thanks for that, Dooshima. So, Nkebet, looking at the advent of artificial intelligence, at the top of the show, I was talking about the fact that OpenAI had launched this new chat GPT-4C model. Now, we're now going to be interacting with AI tools in the digital space. If I have a voice speaking back to me that sounds really authentic, that can speak in my local language, that just heightens the risk and vulnerabilities I may potentially face. So how do you see the advent of these new technology models really helping to drive the dynamics in the cybersecurity space, and especially in the payment space?
That's an amazing question. We've seen what is called deepfake becoming more prevalent. We have seen a lot of, I think, things that we couldn't even believe existed, right? We had a situation where somebody had the name and the voice of the CEO and called the PA or the CFO to do a transaction. And that transaction went through because it was the same voice coming from the same phone, the same way it usually gave those instructions. And so that was a fraud that happened using deepfake. Now, what we always would say is you can compete on sales, but you can't compete on risk. You need to be able to collaborate with other players in the industry to ensure that you're one step above this, or one step ahead of these vulnerabilities and these things. Now, when we look at the voice recognition, AI, ChatGPT, the most important thing here is to also look at patterns. So, and that's why risk-based authentication comes in and behavioral authentication comes in for payments. And these need to be embedded into, like the way you put embedded finance, we need to have embedded risk in our development as banks, as fintechs. Anywhere money is moving, there needs to be an embedded risk authentication in, where you're not just relying on the voice, there's another behavioral pattern that is being relied on, especially as relates to AI with voice commands, with even chats and messaging system. Once money is moving, it is important that the authentication is heightened there. And so the only way to know this is by, one, building out that infrastructure. So, the same way you build your data privacy when you build products, that's the same way we need to start to build our risk and cybersecurity threats as we do this. And one last thing I just want to put in is, as businesses grow, they need to be able to test this system from time to time. There are things there's what is called ethical hacking, where you can actually put threats into your environment, try hacking your environment, behave like a hacker and see where vulnerabilities lie in your environment. Try putting a call or sending an instruction and see if you have the right commands in your environment to stop those transactions. Only with these periodic checks and staying ahead through embedding risk and cybersecurity in implementation and upgrading it from time to time, will we be able to stay ahead? Would we be able to completely eliminate those risks? No. But that will be ameliorated when we do this.
Yeah, good point. Now, Dooshima, very briefly, in 1 minute if you can, what would you have to say to consumers who are a bit wary about migrating to this sort of online digital payments world in terms of ensuring that they can safeguard their own data, their own details, and their own money online? Very briefly.
So very briefly, I would say that knowledge is power. Consumers need to ask questions, ask these organizations that are processing their transaction relevant questions, read the fine print, those agreements that we all just love to scroll to the end and ignore. Read them, go through them and ask questions. There are a lot of tools and resources online, even on these company websites that can help you understand your digital risk, and just be aware and also trust the systems. Information security and cybersecurity professionals and platforms like Visa put a lot of work into securing our information. So we need to trust, and we also need to do our parts to be literate.
Thank you very much. I've been speaking to Nkebet Mesele of Visa and Dooshima Dapo-Oyewole, an ITU Cyber Track Fellow and Cybersecurity Experts. Well, you heard it. Read the fine print. That's all we have time for on Business Week today. Do have a lovely rest of the weekend ahead, but not before you follow the conversation online. Find me on X at Rolake Akinkugbe. I'm Rolake Akinkugbe Filani, and I'll see you next time.